Oh, what I can do is do my regular promotion of our adult lecture series. And this is the second of 3. This fall's theme is Families of Birmingham. So we have one more to do, which is a month from tonight. Basically, it's November 14th. And on that night, we're going to do a Peabody's family reunion. So if you grew up in Birmingham or hung out in Birmingham or went to Peabody's restaurant and you have fond memories of being there and what it was like to be able to drop in anytime with a large party and they would somehow make room for you, the Peabody sisters are going to fly back in for the presentation, and we are going to video record it so that we can capture all those memories that people are going to be sharing. So it's going to be kind of like a community oral history of Peabody's restaurant and the Peabody family, really. So that's November 14th, and there's a reminder thing up there. It doesn't say on here that the Peabody sisters are coming because I just learned that yesterday. The way this program came about kind of has its own backstory. And I thought it would be important to give you a little idea about that before we get into the body of the presentation. First, I want to say I'm not a member of the Levin family, although it's a pretty big family, but I'm not a member of the Levin family. I'm not Jewish, but I am a public historian. And our mission at the Birmingham Museum is to preserve Birmingham's history and to tell Birmingham's story. And I was struck by encountering this story, which I didn't know a lot about, relating to Levinsons department store. We were doing some research on the early retail history of downtown Birmingham. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then somewhere else I saw a piece of information that said Levinsons were the first Jews in Birmingham. And I went, oh, that's really interesting. And in the process of just trying to gather more information, it wasn't coming together for me because we didn't have a lot all in one place in our museum about this family. Coincidentally, serendipitously, Carl Levin contacted the museum and said, I understand you have an oral history of my mother, Bess Levinson Levin, and I wonder if you have the audio of that. I'd like to get a copy of it. So we did, and I provided it to him. And I just kept coming across little things in the museum that made me start asking questions like, who were the Levinsons? How did they end up here? What does it mean to be the first Jewish family in Birmingham? And it was a village at the time. What else can I find out about that? And it so happened that it turned into this First Families program that we were doing because they started turning up information, but I didn't have very good photographs. I couldn't find any. They weren't available. And thankfully, I made Carl and Sandy Levin aware that I was going to do this and invited them. And thank goodness he got back to me and said, yes, we're able to come. And he began to share personal family photos. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you, with certainly the family permission, is a little bit of the story of this family. The other thing I guess I want to say is that certainly they are a high-profile family. They're a large family. They have a lot of very well-known people in the family. But as I was researching the generations and the roots of this family, I became aware that more than anything, they're really a story of love and family commitment and devotion, respect, especially not only for each other, although that's very evident in every generation, but respect for everyone, for others, for the community. And I think that comes across very well. Hi. And I hope that you also see the same thing I did. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to talk for about a half hour, show quite a few slides with a lot of photos, and then Carl and David Levinson, another one of the Levinson descendants, are going to make a couple remarks and take questions. We are going to record that for posterity, and so I do have microphones, and we're going to have to do the microphone in the audience thing for that. Last thing is, it is warm in here. It's something we can't do anything about. I hope it ceases to be a problem. Okay, so this story, at least from the Birmingham perspective, starts around the 1880s. This is a map of what Birmingham was like at that time. It was largely an agricultural community. There was a little village area. I can point out a couple things. Got my pointer here. So this is Woodward Avenue here. The way the orientation is on this map. This is Woodward, and this is Maple. Here's a great photo, at least I love it. If you were looking out over these hills, you'd be standing on Southfield Road, and this is Maple, going off to the west. This is the mill, and Quarton Lake would have been back in here. So this is the environment around Birmingham at the time that the Levinsons immigrated. Another map, just giving you sort of what it was like around here. Here's the 1 square mile of the village itself. This actually is a 1908 map, but the village hadn't changed very, very much from 1877 to 1908, which tells you something. The village was pretty prosperous, though. It was halfway between Detroit and Pontiac, and so the surrounding farms did a lot of their commercial business in town. So most of the merchants and retail and whatnot going on in town related to those surrounding farms, most of them. Oh, and so here's the important data. 1890s Birmingham had 4 churches, a sizable commercial downtown, and residential neighborhoods. 4 churches. So now to integrate what, this is a very short, this is not a complete or comprehensive history, but just to give you the background of the immigration of Jews to Michigan. In the mid-19th century, 1850 and a little later, Jews were leaving Germany and coming to the U.S. because of the oppression in Germany. And many of them came to Detroit and founded quite a large community in Detroit at that time. And then another wave of immigration took place from the 1880s to 1914 because of oppression in Eastern Europe, especially Poland and Russia. And it's that wave of immigration that relates to the Levinson family. What would typically happen is at this point in America's economic evolution, when you were an immigrant and you came to the U.S., if you came to a city, you needed to pick up work as quickly as you could. And what most Jews did is they would come to cities like New York, Detroit, and they would begin as peddlers. That was a very common way to make a living. And that continued in rural areas too, although it was much more common in cities. Now, in Michigan, it was interesting because where there had been economic booms, especially in the use of natural resources such as lumber, there would be a likelihood that some of the immigrating population, Jewish people as well as other immigrants, would be attracted to these sort of, let's call them boom towns for lack of a better word. And Bay City was one of those in the late 19th century. Well, so coming back down to the Oakland County area, though, I want to highlight the importance of the Detroit United Railway. That was the light rail line that ran down Woodward Avenue from Detroit, I should say ran up Woodward Avenue from Detroit to Pontiac. It was, and you can see it here, right in the middle of the road were the rails. This is Woodward Avenue, and this is Birmingham in around 1910. Here's the DUR rail, and they ran on a regular schedule, and they were a very convenient way for people to get on and get off and go between the cities in southern part of Michigan. Ann Arbor, Detroit, Pontiac, Flint. And just as an FYI, this corner right here, you can't make it out that well in this photo, but it says Levinsons over the door. And I'll be showing you more about that in a minute. So the thing about the Detroit United Railway, the light rail line, the trolley, is that it allowed people to move easily between these cities that were not too far apart, but it would have been difficult to do it by wagon. And that made a big difference in terms of Birmingham's location, again, on the line between Detroit and Pontiac. It was important because it allowed people to maintain physical connections that they would have had difficulty doing in any other way. And that was significant for people who were Jewish. This man has a question. Yes?
Going back to the map, is that old Woodward or is that new Woodward?
That was old Woodward. So the question was the old Woodward. In other words, the Woodward that goes right through downtown Birmingham now that has all the, yes. Oh, okay, hi. Welcome. Okay, so as I was saying, there was a fairly large Jewish community in Detroit in the 1880s and in the 1890s. And there were some Jews that began to, let's call it, explore opportunities in Oakland County, out away from the city. And the two significant families that I wanted to mention, first is the Barnetts. The Barnetts actually were, I guess they would be, because they were the first Jewish family in Pontiac and they settled there in 1895, and the Levinsons came to Birmingham in 1896. I guess you could say the Barnetts were the first in Oakland County, perhaps. However, they were both coming to towns that had the same access to the trolley, and they were both communicating back and forth to Detroit, especially to be able to keep kosher. That allowed them to maintain close community ties as well to Detroit. But the other interesting thing is both families ended up opening stores and were very successful. Here's an image of Woodward and Maple looking east in 1910. So that is East Maple going from downtown toward Troy. This is Woodward here. The light rail line, I should do that with my right hand. The light rail line runs right through the middle of this street. That's Woodward. So you can see, in a way, that this is a community that's just on the edge of making progress, especially in terms of transportation and growth and everything else. It was a good time to start a business in Birmingham. But the Levinsons, actually, the story begins a little earlier with Isaac and Hannah Bloomberg Levinson, who, it's sometimes spelled with an E, like that, who came to Bay City. They came in the late 1880s. Hannah Bloomberg had been born in 1840 in what was then Latvia. She actually died in 1923 in Bay City. So they immigrated together. Some of their children, I think all of their children were born before they came. I think that's true. It must be. So here are some of their children and where they were born. You can see that at one point they were in Germany. So this is a family that went from place to place, and I don't know the story behind that. I can imagine a couple reasons why they were moving around a lot. And then they came to Bay City in the late 1880s, and they were there until at least 1896. And then according to some research I came across, they then relocated to Queens, New York. So they moved quite a bit, looking for better opportunities, perhaps. Well, Morris Levinson, who was born to Hannah and Isaac in Russia in 1872, didn't go to New York City. In fact, he is the reason that Levinsons department store ended up where it was in Birmingham. And then there was actually another sibling that I mentioned who did stay in Bay City and then ended up in Mount Clemens, and that was Rosa Levinson. Another family photo of Morris Levinson, and now, is it Gittell? Gittel, okay. And Gittel. And Fellman seems to be wrong too. It is instead, what were we saying, David? Okay, he's got a family tree that he just bought me, and it's not Fellman, but that was the way some of the documents recorded it. Gittel was born around 1875 in Russia, and she died here in 1957. She came alone to the U.S. at age 15. Apparently, she had a brother in Detroit, in the Jewish community there, and she spoke no English when she came. And that's one of those situations that really speaks to the difficulty, the determination. I can imagine all kinds of feelings of a 15-year-old girl traveling all this way, not speaking English, and trying to find her brother in Detroit. Morris died in 1954. His parents were in Bay City, as I already mentioned. He had a brother named Isaac. His father was Isaac. His brother was Isaac Izel. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correct. Levinson, and it was recorded differently. It was recorded with an E. And he also had a brother named Menachem Mendel. I can't figure out what happened to them exactly, but they were in Bay City for a time, and they showed up on census, and then they were gone. But anyway, so I think what I'm trying to clarify in my own mind, and maybe for you too, is that this family was not able to stay completely together for whatever forces were acting on them, not at this generation. And I'm not sure if they've been lost in contact with each other or not, but from Morris and Gittel's generation forward, we have a family that is very large and has had really strong bonds. All right, so a couple more points. They lived in Birmingham first at the northwest corner of Danes and Woodward, and then they moved to the southwest corner of Brown and Purdy Street. This information comes from oral history information we have from Bess Levinson and also from David Levinson. So that's where this comes from. Now, they actually resided in Birmingham until about 1920 and moved back to Detroit. But the Birmingham store continued in operation during that time. So again, Fellman is not quite the right surname, but this is an image of Gittel's father. After she came here, she never saw her parents again back in the old country. Some more about Morris. He apparently came to Bay City with his parents, but didn't stay there very long. Came to Detroit, began to make some money, and he did what a lot of first immigrant Jews were doing. He began as a peddler. He very quickly realized that he could serve the needs of the farmers in Oakland County, especially those in the vicinity of Birmingham, who they're busy on their farms. It's very convenient for a peddler to bring them odds and ends and things that they need. And he became pretty successful. Fairly quickly, according to the stories, he would sometimes stay overnight at the farms because of the long route that he was taking with his horse and buggy. Eventually, within a fairly short time, the Birmingham residents, the people he knew on the farms, began to encourage him to set up shop in town. So he was invited to open a store, and they were his customers, and so he had that support already. And one of the stories I came across was that the only storefront available was kind of an old beat-up building on East Maple Road that had wood floors that had huge cracks in the floors. They were so bad. The structure was in such bad shape. And something about, I think this was David remembering this in his oral history, like they would unfortunately sometimes drop money down in the cracks of the floor and not be able to get it back. So luckily, in 1898, Frank Ford, one of the local residents in Birmingham, was building a new building at the northeast corner of Woodward and Maple. And then Levinsons was its first occupant and was there for 20 years. By about 1905, Levinson added frontage and lines of goods that he was selling, so that he actually had 5 different stores, 5 different unique types of goods that he was selling. And the name of the building, the signage on the building from different periods in time changes from Levinsons to Levinsons Department Store, and then at one point it's called the Birmingham Department Store. And David Levinson, in his oral history, said we sold everything from groceries to furniture. Now, another thing that I discovered, I was fascinated by, is that Morris was a member of the Birmingham Masonic Lodge. So here's photos. I get to show you some photos now. That is, you can see the name Levinsons there. And this is this is Woodward, just for a reminder for folks. This is Old Woodward. And then this is Maple right here. Oops, I should be doing this with my other hand. Maple's right here. Here's another couple of views. Further in time, so this is the Maple Road face going west on Maple Road of the building. So it's this area in here. This is Maple, this is Woodward. This was actually a park at one time across the street, and then you could see Levinsons in the background. Another great shot of the building. Again, this is called the Ford Building. It still exists. And then, unfortunately, progress happened in Birmingham for Levinsons. And you know what that means. It means you have to move. They're going to tear something down. They're going to build something up. And it happens every couple of years, whether we like it or not. And downtown is no exception. And it wasn't back then. So they were forced to leave the Ford Building when the First State Savings Bank bought the building in 1916. And according to some documents that I came across, the Morris bought this property here, which was the Volney-Nixon property on South Old Woodward. The actual address doesn't exist that way anymore. It was 128 to 132 South Old Woodward. So the building in here is the McBride Building. It was built here, and this property, I think I have a modern picture I can show you in a little bit. But I think the point being made that he did purchase a property and he built a new building actually as far back as 1916, and he was in business in Birmingham for quite a long time after that. Here's an ad that was in the 1939 Piper yearbook. Levinsons Department Store. You can get footwear, dry goods, household goods, and prompt and courteous service, and free delivery in Birmingham. Imagine, right? Now, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the evolution of department stores and what that meant and how that fits into the retail history. Department stores were not a completely new concept. they really originated back to Paris in the middle of the 19th century as a concept. So you come to one store and you can buy everything in that one very large store. But it really took off in the U.S. at the latter part of the 19th century. But it wasn't something you found in Birmingham. It was a new idea in Birmingham because most of those stores in Birmingham were these small merchants, hardware, dry goods, bakery, like that. And what Morris did was he expanded his lines and he expanded his physical space, but he incorporated it all in as one store, essentially, Levinsons. And that was a pretty modern concept, in my opinion. This is a photo of Morris. I'm guessing at the date. I don't know if it was the 1930s, but it appears around that time to me. And here's a photo of Brown Street in Birmingham. They lived on Brown Street. I'm not saying they lived in that house, but you get an idea of what the street and the neighborhood was like at the time they lived there. So moving forward, the Levinsons set up their business and began to start a family. And so Aaron was born in 1894 before they actually opened the store in Birmingham. David in 1896, Bess in 1898, and HY in 1900. Now, one of the things that Carl helped me understand is that Bess was born in 1898 in Birmingham. If you think about that, she was not born in a hospital. She was born at home, but she was born in Birmingham. And I think the family line is the first Jew born in Birmingham. When you raise a family, whether you're an immigrant family and you're trying to maintain your identity, your cultural identity, your religious identity or not, there is that thing called a mixing bowl. And public schools were one place where everybody, especially in the town of Birmingham, I mean, every kid went to this building for many, many years. This was the Hill School. All grades were taught here. All grades came in the door in the morning and went out the door for recess. So there was an awful lot of community interaction between all these kids. After 1912, the Hill School was only used for 7th to 12th graders because a new elementary had been built. So I want to quickly tell you a little bit about some of the Levinson children and then expound a little bit. H.Y. Levinson, let me just see something. Yeah. H.Y. Graduated from U of M in 1922. He owned the Farmington Enterprise newspaper, and he founded WCAR Radio. So he's considered a radio pioneer. And I would have a photo of him if I could have found one, but I wasn't able to. Aaron Levinson, I did find a photo of him, and I know it's pretty blurry, but he graduated from Detroit Central High, so that's an interesting point. He was attending school in Detroit, not in Birmingham. He went to U of M Law School, graduated in 1916. He tried to get into the military because we were, entering World War I, and he was not able to. He had some physical issues that he couldn't pass the exam. So the story is that when he couldn't pass the exam at the recruitment office in Birmingham, he just went to Detroit and tried there. But he still wasn't able to get in, and he was sad about that all of his life, apparently. He also was a master at the Birmingham Masonic Lodge, according to his obituary. So there's another Mason in the family. He also, interestingly, defended the village of Birmingham in a 1921 lawsuit before the Michigan Supreme Court. The DUR light rail line had sort of a rate issue with the village of Birmingham, and so people who were riding the village line were paying more than they were supposed to. And I think it was a difference of 10 cents and 12 cents. And the village sought to, I think, refused to pay. I can't remember exactly what happened, but when the case came before the Michigan Supreme Court, they found in favor of the village. Aaron actually relocated to California before 1930, and Carl's understanding of it is that his younger sister Bess, who knew how to drive, was actually the one who drove him all the way out there. He had TB. Okay, thank you. Okay, because the climate was going to be better for his TB. And here's another member of the Levinson siblings, David Levinson. Now, David was an interesting guy. We found a lot of photos of him. He was an athlete. This is his, I think that's his football team from school. Here he is right here in the front with what looks like a buddy, I'm not sure. This is his senior photo. He went to Birmingham High School, so we have those photos, so I could track that down. And then he also he played baseball for U of M, so he was in their yearbook with his photo. He graduated in 1917, and he wanted also to go into the military, and he did, but we were just pulling out of Europe. And so he actually was in post-war Europe, post-war. I think he was in the Army. Does that seem right? Sergeant. Thank you. No, that's all it. A little bit more about David Levinson, because we know a little more about him, being that he stayed in the community and he went into real estate as his profession. This is we came across this photo. We love it when we find these. And it's actually a photo of a street in Birmingham. And the important thing here is that there's a sign that says Levinson Realty. And we went, whoa, there it is. This is what the sign says. Move to northeast corner, Woodward and Maple, Parks Block. So that's sometimes when we work in the museum field, it's those little snippets that help us date something in time and when it happened. And then he was, at this point, elected Birmingham Justice of the Peace, but he went on to do even more things. He became Oakland County Supervisor for many years, and thank you, David, for explaining that he was instrumental in the development of the county complex that we all know and love so much. He was part of that whole concept early on. He also had a high school sweetheart. The reason I was showing you the school in part was because I wanted to tell this part of the story. Martha Nye, who was not Jewish, was someone he met in high school. She was a year behind him. And they did not marry right away, but they did get married. And Martha, her family lived on Danes Street and not far away, and she went to school with him. Her uncle was Ned Danes, who owned the National Hotel in town. But Giddel was very opposed to David marrying outside the faith. That was a huge problem for her. He did marry Martha. He married her a little bit later and then moved back to Birmingham in 1926. And then their son Bernard was born in 1927. Well, during that time, it did cause conflict with his mother. And I guess after their son was born, she began to warm up to the family a little bit again. But you can imagine how difficult it was for her. She wanted to maintain the family and the cultural identity, and here was her son, going off into a world that she did not want him to, and that must have been very, very hard. And now we come to Bess Levinson Levin, who, as I said, was born at home in Birmingham. So she's the first Jew born in Birmingham, last Jew born in Birmingham, so far as I know. Attended Birmingham High School. She lived in Birmingham, she went away to school, came back, but she didn't hang out much in Birmingham after she became an adult. She really became more interested in what was going on in Detroit. And she married Saul Levin in 1927. One of the great efforts of her life was to be active in the Metropolitan Detroit chapter of Hadassah. Now here is a photo we had. This is her class from school, and this is the inset. That's Bess as a young woman. Later on, this is Bess with the Hadassah leadership in 1951. And I love this photo. It's great. I don't know, is that their wedding photo, do you think? Or no? Okay. They just look so what do I want? Serene. Okay, so a little bit more about Bess and Saul, because what happened with Bess and Saul's family is also a very big story. The family lived in Detroit on LaSalle. Their children were Hannah, Sander, and Carl. I would not be able to go into the detail about everything that these people have been able to accomplish in their lives. I'm going to hit just a couple of high things, and I encourage you, if you have other interests, to follow it up online if you like, but the biographies for Sander and Carl Levin are just too long for me to include completely. There are a few other legal Levins, and I want to apologize to any Levins or Levinsons that don't get mentioned here, but these are the ones that pop up with every Google search there is. Theodore, who was Saul's brother, actually, and was chief judge of the U.S. District Court of Eastern Michigan in Detroit, and the county, or the building, the courthouse is named for him now. Charles Levin, who was Theodore's son, and so it's Carl and Sander's cousin, is served for the Michigan on the Michigan Supreme Court as his high point of his career. And Avern Cohen, who is a Birmingham resident, is currently serving as judge of the U.S. District Court in the Theodore Levin courthouse. But the real story that I want to get back to has to do with this group, Hannah, Sander, and Carl. In the different things that I came across, not that there was tons and tons of personal items available online, but it does seem that these were people who were very close. Their bonds were very strong, and they supported each other in many, many ways throughout their entire lives. Here's a little bit about Hannah. She was married to William Gladstone, and she was instrumental in helping with both her brothers' campaigns, but she did a lot of other stuff too. She was appointed to the Social Justice Committee in Lansing by Governors Blanchard and Engler. She did die in Seattle, but she's buried in Clover Hill Park here with family members. But this quote is important, I think, and it sums up everything that I had encountered as well. What one values in life is so important, and there is none more important in my mind than the value of family. Family is a value to me more precious than gold and cannot be bought or sold. And so, moving on a little bit, family is written all over these two. I love that photo. It's great. Another great one. This is Bess in the photo with them, too, in the 1970s. I couldn't get an exact date on that photo. Another one showing them sitting side by side at a Democratic fundraiser of one sort or other. And then here's the official U.S. Senate photo for Carl and some of his accomplishments and for Sander and some of his accomplishments, which are so numerous. As I said, I couldn't include them all. But that's not the last of the Levins by any means. So Representative Andy Levin is now representing the 9th District, which was Sander's seat. Has that handsome Levin look, doesn't he? And coming back to Birmingham, so I just have a couple more slides, then we're going to turn the lights on and invite the Levins and David Levinson up, and the other Levinsons who turned up tonight, if you have questions you'd like to ask. So the Levins and Levinsons still have a presence in Birmingham, and it is in this building. This is the Quarton building, which is on West Maple, at 142 to 146. And I was able to get a historic photo of the building. My understanding is that when Morris retired, he sold the property, which would have been that second building on Woodward, and bought this building to invest in. And they still own the building 70 years later. This is the historic district description in the city of Birmingham. Says this down here. From the historic district record, Fred V. Quarton erected this building in 1916 on the site of the family home of his wife, Emma Blakesley. Through the years, the facade at street level has changed several times, but the second floor has kept its original appearance, even including the metal cornice with its 4 distinctive metal spheres and the letters of the name Quarton just under it. The Levinson family, present owners of this building, purchased it prior to the Great Depression and have owned it for over 70 years. And then I have a source listing here, not so much for you guys, but we're going to be creating a video of this, and so I thought anyone who needed to know some of the sources could find them there. And if I could invite any of the Levin family, Levinsons, that would like to come up front, we can grab another couple chairs and invite the audience if you have questions you'd like to ask, or actually I wanted to make sure that the Levins had a chance to speak if you had some words you'd like to say first. So would you like to join us up here? Yes, it's good. Have a seat. Oh, I can stand. Yes, you should sit. There you go. We can grab another chair, I think.
Well, first, let me thank you, Leslie, and the Historical Society and the museum for teaching us a lot about our own family, frankly.
Thank you.
Let me introduce my wife, Barbara, who's sitting here. We've been married now, I know I'm going to be 1 year off, 59. We're getting to the age where we forget whether it's 59 years or 58 years we've been married. David's brothers, Rick and John, are here. So these are 3 of David and Martha's grandchildren. And I have very few comments because it was a wonderful, really presentation, and want to save most of the time we have for questions. Turn it over to Sandy for whatever comments he wants, and David for whatever comments he wants. Just a few quick things. We were a very close family. The one strain was mentioned that our grandma, Giddle, was somewhat taken aback, I think, when their son David married a non-Jewish woman, a wonderful woman named Martha. And that became forgotten over time, maybe never forgotten, but overcome by Giddle. And we were very close, though, actually, always, to our Uncle Dave and to our Aunt Martha. They lived right off the golf course. What is it, the Birmingham Country Club now? They had a great house there. We loved to visit them. Martha did some great cooking. I'm trying to remember what it was. She was really was it pickles? That was She did apple sugar, but she was a terrific cook and very, very warm. And David was an incredible guy. It was briefly alluded to by implication that he was a Republican. How he slipped into our family, we'll never know, but he was, I won't say he was the favorite uncle, because we obviously had more than one uncle, including on our mother's side, but he was a favorite. We loved to visit David and Martha for all kinds of reasons, but they were terrific. And David was what you really want a politician to be, which is a true nonpartisan. The reference there was that he was elected as the chairman of the board, I guess, because there was no opposition to him, basically. Just imagine that these days. No Democratic opposition to a Republican or vice versa. Well, that's what happened back then. So he was just terrific and a pioneer in a lot of ways. I think in Oakland County, I think he was also, better leave this to David, who knows more than I do by far about his own immediate family. But I think he was also involved in the new location. Actively of the courthouse and other things out there. But we'll turn this over to you to do your thing. Leslie made an interesting reference that our mother Bess was probably the first. They were the first Jewish family, and made reference to the fact that Bess was probably the last, as well as the first Jewish person born in Birmingham, because she was born in their house. Her older brothers were born in a hospital in Detroit. But Bess then Leslie said something that struck you, I think, all as being kind of weird, given the number of Jewish families in Birmingham, that she was the last Jewish person born in Birmingham. And if that's true, it's only because she was born in her house. And there are still, I guess, folks born in their homes, but not very many. But that was the reference that Leslie made at that time. That railroad that you saw there, the Detroit Urban Railroad, and we got to look up that lawsuit, by the way.
I have a copy of it. I can forward it to you.
That's great. I didn't know that our Uncle Aaron, who was the oldest, represented the village. I'm glad he was on the right side of that lawsuit. But our grandma and grandpa were observant Jews, much more observant than than Sandy and me, but we're still obviously proud Jews, but we're not as observant as they were, and they kept kosher. So that rail line that you saw there, the Detroit Urban Railroad, was the way in which our Grandma Giddle, or I guess maybe Grandpa Morris, would have come into Detroit every week to buy kosher food. And the only other thing I think I would say is that the Quarton building that you made reference to, and I ought to put a plug in here. Dave is the guy who manages this property, so he should be putting in these plugs. But if anyone needs some space in the second floor of the Quarton building, I think we still have it available. You talked about how old it is and how yeah, that's the problem. But anyways, great location. Just see David right after this show. You want to rent some great space. And you mentioned that our mother, who was a very independent soul, very strong and independent, drove our Uncle Aaron, who was the oldest of the four, to California for health reasons. You mentioned that. And the only other well, there's a little picture there. Sandy and I are incredibly close, as we were to our sister Hannah, by the way. But one of those pictures, if you look very, very closely, that picture when we were young in front of an old car, take a look at my eye. That mark you see there, that little scar in that picture, it was the only time he ever struck his brother, I think, in all the years we've known each other. And we're incredibly close. And I'm not even sure that was the origin of that mark, but I give Sandy a hard time every time I see that picture. So, Sandy, older brother?
First, let me say hello to cousins I don't see very often.
He's got a cold. I got a cold. Yep.
Just a few quick things. Thank you all for coming. A few quickies. Our grandparents, there was reference to it. I think all of us should take note of that. Because our grandma came over, as mentioned, on a boat. She was 15. Spoke no English, as mentioned. And we think that when she was put on that boat, that her parents thought that they'd never see her again. And our guess is that she kind of thought maybe she'd never see her parents again. So when people talk about the courage, the conviction, the determination of immigrants to this country, I think we should understand the circumstances under which people came here. And they never saw each other again. And related to that was they never talked to us about that. And maybe it was in part our fault, but I can't remember any discussion by either our grandparents about Europe and the family there, the pogroms. Secondly, I just want to say a word about the closeness of the five of us. There was this feeling, I think, by our grandmother, which was somewhat common there about marrying someone of a different religion. But people ask us, why are we like we are? One needs to, in some respect, just look at our parents and our parents' feeling about their brother Dave and Aunt Martha. And the closeness of it and the determination on the part of our parents that Martha was as much as anyone else part of the family. And we went there often. I thought it was her pickles, we went there often. I want to say a word about David Levinson. He was on the Board of Supervisors for 30-some years. He was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And he really was the parent of the center where the courthouse and all the buildings are. It was controversial then to move the county seat, the buildings, away from Pontiac out there. He was determined for better or worse. And so there was a very close relationship. So it's now your turn, David, who manages these buildings. He's gonna remind everybody that our grandparents bought 2 buildings. And you maybe haven't been often in one, but my guess is, if you'll admit it, you've been a lot in the second one. That's where Dick O'Dow's is. You don't have to confess. All I remember about our grandparents' store was the cookie or the candy. You're too young to remember that. Yeah. But no, your dad, of course. That's all I remember. The candy jars. It was, I think, a glass jar. But anyway, this family has been so close, and our parents were determined for it to be that way, and nothing could get in the way. Nothing. So
now Bernie and Mary Ellen's kids.
Yeah. So, their grandchildren, we're great-grandchildren, so we don't remember, great-grandma and grandma. But I will say one thing that Grandpa instilled in all of us and hammered into was that family was everything. And no matter what we felt like, we weren't going to allow anything to come between family. And I guess that came from the great-grandparents as well. I mean, just an example, we were, I never saw my grandparents ever go to any service. Grandpa didn't practice, Grandma didn't practice. My dad ended up marrying an Irish Catholic woman and converted even before he had met her to Catholic. And my grandfather used to tease my dad a lot. He said, "Do you know they allowed Jews in Birmingham before they allowed the Catholics?" But, some of our fondest memories when I was growing up was waking up on Christmas morning and having my grandparents there, having my Aunt Celia and Uncle Hy there. So they came, and I think Aunt Bess came once or twice too for Christmas morning for us. So it was, a close family no matter what. And, my grandfather was a practicing Republican, very fiscally conservative, which I think has shown up in Oakland County for, what was it, 66 he retired, or 75 he retired? Yeah, so it's good stead for Oakland County. And, just to correct you, Sandy, we own more than 2 buildings in downtown Birmingham at one point in time. We actually owned all the properties from Willits Alley west to where the Waterbeek building is and north to Willits building.
Wow.
So they lost a number of the buildings during the Great Depression, but we held on to the 2 that we own today. So.
By the way, I was appointed to the Board of Supervisors, and I went to see Uncle Dave. He greeted me so warmly. And I said, "What happened to your power, Uncle Dave?" Because they put me on the miscellaneous committee. And the chief function was overseeing the dog warden. But there was so much love. Our parents just said, "Look, I don't care about the rest of this." And so they made a point to visit Uncle Dave and Aunt Martha and make sure everybody knew we were all the same family. And maybe in this day and age, now and then we should say to ourselves, in this country, we're all the same family. But, so... political comment. I don't know what we do with this.
I did want to ask if either of you have any comments you'd like to make?
Really good, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, so we're going to let you hold on to this because now we're going to ask for questions from the audience. They will get their own mics for that.
Yes, I wish my wife were here tonight, but after 50 years, she's tired of me. And her maiden name was Levin. And she's at a Shiva house tonight. That's why she can't be here. Dexter, she lived on Fullerton, 3 homes off of Dexter, and went to McCullough School. Does that ring a bell? On Wildermere. And her parents left Germany in the late 30s, thankfully. And like she said, they ended up in New York for maybe 10 years and came to Detroit. And Dexter Davison was the big, center of the Jewish community. What street? Oh, I know where it is, sure. And we moved to this area from Huntington Woods for Birmingham schools. So I'm wondering if any of the Levins have any demographics on the Jewish, I think 21,000 is population of the Jewish percentage of that, because our sons we had 2 sons, went to Berkshire Middle School and Groves High School. My wife was very pleased because there was a nice representation of Jewish kids and students. So I'm just wondering if Birmingham ever did a demographic on that.
I have not heard of something like that unless it's a self-reporting kind of thing, because it's not the kind of information I think would be collected by the city for any reason. But I can try to find out, and you can give me a call at the museum.
The census might have. The census might have.
Oh, the census identifies it. That's right.
I do want to
Talking
tell
about-
Levins one more thing. She
About
still
when
can't-
though? You're talking
Pardon?
about the number now? Our grandkids went to Groves and Berkshire. No, I mean,
We did the Ancestry.com, and there's no connection. You don't have to worry about being related to me.
no. I mean, right now it's changed dramatically, and maybe we don't know the exact number, but 30, 40 years ago there was immense discrimination. But
She still can't say New York. She says New York, and she can't pronounce water. She calls it water.
But today,
Sir, if you would like to inquire at the reference desk upstairs, the librarians could look at current and historical census data to answer that question for you.
I went to high school in Birmingham with a kid called Bernie Levinson. Your father. He used to play tennis? He used to play tennis.
Jane, you have to speak into the mic.
Yeah, he passed away in 2000.
Okay. Okay. Well, anyway, I just, when I first was listening to you, I kept thinking, we're not talking about the people that I know. But then I discovered, I was thinking about the Davidsons. They had a clothing store in Birmingham, very fine store. But, so they might have been the second Jewish people in Birmingham.
They didn't show up.
Thank you for telling me what happened to Bernie Levinson.
by the way, one of the wise things I'm now teaching at the U of M that you didn't mention, because your grandfather, he went to U of M and Bess did, and they both graduated. And David, who showed his wisdom, what did he do after he left U of M? Anybody want to guess the wisest thing he could have done? Come on, somebody guess. What was, no, besides that, I mean, what's another wise thing he did? He bought tickets, U of M tickets on the 50-yard line. And you guys still have 2 of the tickets, right?
Talk about a family legacy, right?
When he got those tickets, there were 8. What year did he get it? Well, when the old press box was no longer there, I can't say for sure, 55, 67, someplace in that range. And we've had those tickets ever since. 60 years. 8 tickets, which we've expanded even beyond 8, actually more than 8.
But Grandpa always said he got them in his freshman year to start going football games, so that's 1913.
Another story on him, when he joined the Army, he was able to write his own passes. He would take the train from New York, where he was stationed, New Jersey, all the way to Ann Arbor on Friday night. On Saturday morning, would run from the depot to where the ferry field was at that point in time, which was a little bit
Yost Field House,
Closer.
for anybody that knows that area.
and watch the football game, get back on the train Saturday night, then back to New Jersey. He missed 4 home games during his lifetime from 1913 to 1975.
I know you're not going to repeat it for the microphone, but could you summarize it a little bit?
Well, let's just put it this way. I'm named after my grandfather, and David Levinson has had season football tickets for U of M football games for the past 107 years.
By the way, in that first year, they were a winning team. Yeah.
More or less.
I had a couple of questions. The first one is you alluded to anti-Semitism, but Leslie didn't talk that much about that, and I wondered if in Birmingham the family experienced much anti-Semitism.
I don't think they did. I mean, we never heard about it if they did. They were part of the lodge here, the Masonic Lodge.
Yeah,
We never,
surprising.
I mean, maybe for whatever reason.
If you're the constable, you're probably not gonna get too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know our grandpa Dave was, and so was our father.
But I think there was an awareness of the discrimination. They were the only Jewish family in Birmingham. So they obviously were aware of that. I mean, they were aware of it. So I think it was a somewhat mixed picture, except they were received well. Our grandfather never said anything about discriminating.
Well, they fled anti-Semitism in Europe, obviously, the Tsar's pogroms. But we never heard that there was discrimination in Birmingham. We heard about it in a lot of other places, including Detroit, where we lived.
There were covenants, right? Some neighborhoods
Oh,
had
yeah,
covenants.
absolutely. The covenants, people,
There was a lot of discrimination in this town.
in other words, there was provisions in deeds that said you couldn't sell to Jews or Catholics probably at that time. I love that line about,
Yeah,
Yeah,
anecdotally,
yeah.
as I said, my grandfather used to tease my dad all the time about the fact that the people in Birmingham let the Jews in before they let the Catholics in. Well, our dad used to tease the three of us that we're the smallest minority in the world. We're Irish Catholic Jews.
Just a reminder.
Go figure.
Just a reminder to try to remember the microphone so we can capture these comments because we want to keep this. I can comment only this far. I read, there weren't a lot of personal accounts available to me, but in the oral histories, the way that, for example, Bess talked about her best friend and the kind of antics they would get into and what they would do, I think, especially as a younger woman, younger girl, if there were, I think if she had experienced discrimination at that younger age, I think it might have come up when it was being talked about in her oral history. I think she just was so animated when she was getting into the things that she would do with her friend and her best friend and how they would, walk home from school and how fun that was. It just seemed like it didn't fit with the idea that she directly experienced it, at least not that part of her age. And David, I think his comments were similar. Now, whether there were subtle things, it hasn't come to light, but if anyone knows of anything, I'm very interested in gathering information about that. Also, we have not been able to identify any deed restrictions within Birmingham against Jewish ownership, even in the old deeds. Not against Jews. Yeah, people who are African American, yes, that does show up in some of it. So if anyone finds any of that, please let us know.
I had one more question. There's one Levinson buried at Greenwood Cemetery. I think it's David.
There are 4 Levinsons, 5 Levinsons buried at Greenwood Cemetery. There is David and Martha. There's Bernard and Mary Ellen, our parents, and then my son Matthew. And in fact, something that wasn't mentioned, Martha's family is been in Birmingham even longer than the Levinson family. As they said, she was, Ned Danes was her uncle. And her maiden name was Nye, and her parents, her mother's maiden name was Beatty, and then Beatty's were related to the Danes. So we go back 7 generations here on my grandmother's side in Birmingham. We weren't part of the first 4, but we were in the next group. So.
Thank you for clarifying that. Quiet running.
Well, first of all, you were referring to the cemetery. Is that the one on Oak Street? Okay.
No.
Oh, not Clover Hill, but
Greenwood is on, yes, it's north of Oak.
Oak Street, yes. All right, so my question is, I came in a little late, so I don't know if this was covered, but what drew the family coming from Europe to come to southeastern Michigan?
Came by way of Bay City. A lot of Jewish families started north of here, by the way, including the Upper Peninsula, northern Michigan. The same story, basically, of peddlers who were able to open up retail stores in towns all over Michigan, northern Michigan. And there's a big population in Detroit, but a lot of the Jewish families came south
From up north. Yeah.
Bay City, I guess they started, and that's where they were peddlers and later on department store. You get that Isaac Levinson. Isaac Levinson that you were nice enough to find the directories on back in
1893 and 94 is when the directories identified.
So there's a candy store owner who was obviously Morris's brother in Bay City in 1893. By then he owned a candy store. Yeah.
And candy figured big in Levinsons from everybody's memories, right?
But we lost track, and I've tried to track down the Levinsons that moved to New Jersey, Morris's family, and we've been unable to track them down. Probably because I was looking for an Levinson. Now I know it's En. And maybe if I start tracking again, we'll use that ancestry. And you may, on your family tree, know possibly what happened.
I'm not sure. I know that, and again, I couldn't find the written part of it that detailed how they came over from, well, they said they couldn't determine whether it was Germany or Poland at the time because the border kept changing, every year. Yeah, the interesting thing, if you read Andrew Carnegie's biographies, one of them, in that time, Jews in Eastern Europe were allowed to have four professions, and one of them was peddler. I think the other one was tannery, mortician, and I can't remember the fourth. And they weren't allowed to own land. So by coming to the United States, they could, well, it might have been farmer, but a tenant farmer type thing. So, but becoming the United States at the time, they had the opportunity to own assets in their own name. And so that was a big draw. And as I said, a very major thing was they were family of peddlers in Eastern Europe. So they just brought that same profession over here to America. And, our understanding was through my grandparents was that, Levinson showed up in New York and then traveled either through New York to get to Bay City or through Canada and ended up in Bay City and then migrated down here. So.
We have better information about our grandmother. Remember, her family, the Jewish
Microphone.
families in Eastern Europe were not citizens of those countries. They had no citizenship. If they were in what was Poland, it shifted so much. But they were never Poles or Russians. Though our grandparents, your great grandparents spoke Polish to each other. But they weren't Polish citizens. But on Grandma Giddo's side, we have a better handle, and we've met more relatives on her side. Yeah, they escaped to Sweden in some cases. Well,
I'm wondering if you know how Bez got back from California. Well, Bez drove her brother to California. How did she get back? Did you drive alone?
Didn't fly.
Zoom in.
No, I think she drove back.
Wow,
Car back by herself.
that's pretty impressive.
She was always very self-sufficient. Passed it along to hopefully her kids, but we go to her grandkids because three of them, six of them are, three of them. One of them I'm focused on is named after Bess, just the way you're named after David.
And Saul, of course, Saul.
Wilson,
You got a
Wilson on the
Saul.
other side of the running side.
Yeah, so he's got a Saul grandson. We got, of course, one of our only grandson is named after Barb's dad, Ben. You got, let's see, is there anyone else named after?
Because you don't name, in the Jewish tradition, you don't name somebody after someone who's alive. So you, well,
Do we have time for one more? One final question?
yeah, we're just going over to Dick O'Dow's. We're in no hurry. No, but we really appreciate this.
Is there any story behind Levinson versus Levin?
Totally different families.
Oh,
Yeah. The stem is probably the same, way back, Lev, which by the way I think in Russian is lion. I think Lev is a stem, but the Levin is not as short as the Levinson.
And also, some of the Levinsons were seagulls. That's another story.
In other words, the Levin's name was probably changed in immigration 150 names. Seagulls on Levin.
So, I mean, our families really appreciate this. I mean, because a rather sensitive issue was raised about religion and residence, and the metropolitan Detroit area was one of the more segregated places in this country. We should remember that. It was only 50 years ago in Grosse Pointe they had a point system, maybe 60 years ago, against African Americans, Jewish families, and Italian Americans. And it was difficult for families, Jewish families, to buy in Birmingham 50 years ago. And so I think we were especially thankful. Did Dave Levinson feel at home here? Absolutely. He was essentially Mr. Birmingham. He never lived anywhere else. And his work was here. And he was the leading political figure of Birmingham. He was a powerful, powerful figure on the Board of Supervisors, and he was accepted there. But we should always remember that there were some hurdles, and this larger community had a history of differentiation, and people were kept out. People moved accordingly. It was no surprise where Jewish families moved 50 years ago. Our grandpa went down to Hastings Street. It was our grandpa, I think, to buy meats. The Jewish families moved, though, to the west of here. So I think we should remember that, to be thankful that we've made some progress here. And the history of this, it's so important that you're doing this so that people have a memory, a remembrance of the way it was. And it took some courage. I want to finish with this because I never talked to my Uncle Dave. I was very close to him. But it took some, about this. Yeah. exclusion, but he both felt a bit different but accepted. And he became such an intrinsic part of this community, which was a tribute to the community, but in that sense he was a pioneer. We really shouldn't forget that. Dave Levinson was a pioneer. And he helped to spread the wings within this community. He was totally accepted at the same time he knew that lots of others weren't. So I think the Historical Society, we should all pay tribute to the society for talking about this.
Well, I can say that I felt that this was a story that needed to be shared more widely. It's not the only interesting Birmingham story that we'd like to share, but it's one important one, and we hope to do more of this. Our focus next year in our exhibit is going to be on women and the place that a lot of the untold stories of women in Birmingham and their contributions and the suffrage movement and things that we don't want this to be just a set of stories about a certain segment of the people who came to Birmingham and founded it, but more diverse than that, because I think our community is diverse, has been diverse, and I was just so thrilled, truly thrilled. Carl, thank you 10 times over for your availability and for helping me with the photographs, because I would have had big holes in the story to tell if I didn't have those, plus some of the other information.
In exchange for all that great service, leave my beard off your pictures, would you?
And by the way, when you do this in the future also, you might want to talk about the politics of Birmingham.
Stay away from
No, because remember, the Kavanaughs and the Harts were here. Remember that? Huh?
I'll take that. And may I just remind everybody that we will have the final video of this available. It's going to be free. It'll be online. The Bloomfield Area Cable Group will be providing that. So please let us know at the museum if you want a link, and we can put it on our website too. Just get in touch with us.